The world is holding its breath. In cities from Tel Aviv to Tehran, and in capitals far beyond the Middle East, people are glued to their screens, watching events unfold with a sense of dread and disbelief. The tension is palpable, as if the very air is charged with uncertainty. For decades, Iran and Israel fought a shadow war, proxies, cyber attacks, covert strikes. This conflict simmered beneath the surface, rarely erupting into full view, but always threatening to boil over. Intelligence agencies played a deadly game of cat and mouse, while militias and hackers carried out attacks that could be denied, blamed on others, or simply left unexplained. It was dangerous, but contained. The world's powers watched nervously, hoping that the fragile balance would hold, that the violence would remain in the shadows and not spill into the open. In the summer of 2025, everything changed. The conflict erupted into open warfare. What had once been whispered about in intelligence briefings was now splashed across global headlines. Explosions rocked city centers and civilians scrambled for safety as the world watched in horror. Direct military strikes replaced deniable operations. Missiles lit up the night sky and armored columns rolled across borders. The rules of engagement were rewritten in real time, as both sides escalated their attacks with unprecedented ferocity. Cities were hit, commanders killed, and the rhetoric of annihilation reached a fever pitch. Streets once bustling with life became battlegrounds. Funerals for fallen leaders turned into rallies for revenge, fueling a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to break. Ballistic missiles now fly from Iran to Israeli cities. Israeli jets strike deep into Iran. The scale and intensity of the attacks have left both nations reeling, and the risk of further escalation grows with every passing hour. The global economy trembles, alliances are tested, and the U.S. tries to support Israel without being drawn into war. Oil prices spike, markets plunge, and leaders scramble to contain the fallout. Every decision is fraught with risk as the world's most powerful nations weigh their next moves. Russia and China see opportunity but fear chaos. They maneuver carefully, seeking advantage while avoiding the unpredictable consequences of a wider conflict. Behind closed doors, diplomats and generals debate how far they are willing to go. The question is no longer if this will escalate, but how to stop it. World leaders gather in urgent summits, searching for a way to pull the region and the world back from the brink. The stakes could not be higher. As of June 15, 2025, the world stands on a knife's edge, waiting for the next move. Every hour brings new developments, and the sense of impending catastrophe grows. The clock is ticking, and no one knows what tomorrow will bring. To understand this crisis, we must look back to a revolution over 40 years ago. The roots of today's conflict stretch deep into history, shaped by ideology, ambition, and the scars of past upheavals. Only by tracing this journey can we hope to grasp what brought us to the edge, and what it will take to step back. Once Iran and Israel were pragmatic partners, sharing intelligence and trade under the Shah. The 1979 Iranian Revolution changed everything. The new Islamic Republic made hostility toward Israel a core principle. Iran built the axis of resistance, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, to pressure Israel by proxy. Israel responded with covert operations, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations, aiming to disrupt Iran's nuclear ambitions and proxy networks. For years, both sides fought in the shadows, careful to avoid direct war. This dangerous balance held until now. Decades of proxy conflict and covert strikes have given way to open confrontation. The rules have changed, and the region is more volatile than ever. The shadow war is over. The unraveling began with the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023, a moment that shattered any lingering sense of stability in the region. The scale and brutality of the assault left communities reeling, as families were torn apart and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. The world watched in horror as the violence unfolded, and the sense of shock quickly gave way to fear of what might come next. The attack sparked a brutal Gaza war, unleashing a wave of destruction and suffering on both sides. As Israeli forces responded with overwhelming force, Gaza's densely populated neighborhoods became battlegrounds. The conflict quickly escalated beyond Gaza, drawing in regional actors and igniting fears of a much wider war. Iran's proxies, especially Hezbollah, intensified attacks on Israel, turning its northern borders into active fronts. Skirmishes and rocket fire became daily occurrences, forcing thousands of Israelis and Lebanese to flee their homes. The threat of a full-scale war loomed larger with every passing day. Throughout 2024, tit-for-tat strikes escalated, with each side seeking to demonstrate strength and resolve. The skies over the region were frequently lit by the flash of missiles and the roar of fighter jets, as both Israel and its adversaries pushed the limits of confrontation. Israel struck Hezbollah hard in Lebanon and targeted Iranian assets in Syria, determined to disrupt the network supplying weapons and support to its enemies. These operations sent a clear message. Israel was prepared to expand the conflict across multiple fronts if necessary. The old rules no longer applied. Israel was willing to take greater risks, crossing red lines that had previously held for years. Military leaders spoke openly about the need to deter future attacks, even if it meant provoking a wider war. By late 2024, direct state-on-state strikes began, small but symbolic attacks that broke the long-standing taboo of proxy-only warfare. Embassies and government buildings were targeted, and the world's attention shifted to the possibility of open war between nations. Each side tested the other's resolve, pushing boundaries and setting a new precedent for escalation. Diplomats scrambled to contain the crisis, but trust was in short supply, and every move was met with suspicion and counter-moves. The feedback loop of retaliation and mistrust spiraled out of control. Each new attack fueled anger and calls for revenge, while the region's streets filled with protests and grief. The cycle of violence seemed unstoppable. By June 2025, the region was a tinderbox, decades of shadow conflict ready to explode into something far more dangerous. The sense of foreboding was everywhere, as ordinary people braced for what felt like the inevitable. The spark had been lit, the explosion was inevitable. The world could only watch as the region edged closer to all-out war, with the consequences impossible to predict. The Middle East was on the brink, its future hanging in the balance as the road to open conflict became a reality. On June 12, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a massive aerial assault on over 100 Iranian sites. Targets included nuclear facilities, IRGC command centers, and major airbases. Israeli officials claimed major successes, key bases destroyed, top commanders and nuclear scientists killed. Explosions rocked Tehran, chaos spread, civilian casualties mounted, with dozens killed and hundreds wounded, including a devastating strike near a residential complex. Israel's message was clear: no part of Iran is safe and its nuclear program is vulnerable. But by striking so deeply, Israel crossed a point of no return. The world braced for Iran's response. Retaliation was inevitable. Iran struck back within hours, launching over 150 ballistic missiles and 100 drones at Israel. Air raid sirens wailed across Israel as its multi-layered defenses, aided by the U.S., intercepted most threats. Still, some missiles broke through, killing civilians, injuring dozens, and damaging buildings in cities like Rishon LeZion and Tel Aviv. The attack proved Iran's reach and resolve, fulfilling years of threats. For Iran, it was about restoring deterrence and projecting strength to its allies. For Israel, it shattered any sense of security. The cycle of escalation was now unstoppable. Both nations had drawn blood. De-escalation seemed distant. The world watched, fearing the next step. The crisis deepened. The world's response fractured along old alliances. The US, UK, and other Western allies backed Israel, condemning Iran's retaliation but stopping short of direct involvement. Russia and China condemned Israel's strikes, called for restraint, and used the crisis to challenge US influence. Europe urged de-escalation, fearing refugee waves and energy shocks. Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis, threatened to widen the conflict. The risk of regional war grew with every new attack. The world was watching a powder keg with a lit fuse. Containment seemed increasingly unlikely. For the U.S., the conflict is a nightmare scenario. President Trump reaffirmed support for Israel, deploying missile defenses and military assets to intercept Iranian attacks. Yet, Washington distanced itself from Israel's initial offensive, hoping to avoid direct war with Iran. The U.S. strategy maximum pressure on Iran to return to nuclear talks while avoiding escalation. But Iran, feeling cornered, may now race for a nuclear bomb. Thousands of U.S. troops in the region are at risk. Any attack on them could trigger a wider war. The U.S. walks a tightrope, supporting Israel but desperate to avoid the abyss of all-out conflict. The stakes could not be higher. Fears of World War III are real, not exaggerated. In today's interconnected world, a single spark in one region can ignite a chain reaction across continents. The global stage is more volatile than ever, with alliances and rivalries shaping every move. The threat isn't just about armies clashing, it's about the unpredictable consequences that follow each decision, each escalation, and each miscalculation. Each strike demands a stronger response, making escalation almost automatic. When one side retaliates, the other feels compelled to answer with even greater force. This tit-for-tat dynamic can spiral out of control, especially when national pride and political survival are at stake. The world has seen how quickly local conflicts can draw in outside powers, turning a regional crisis into a global emergency. If an Iranian missile hits a U.S. base or ship, America would likely launch a full-scale campaign against Iran. Such an attack would be seen as a direct challenge to U.S. power and credibility, forcing a massive military response. The risk of miscalculation or accidental escalation is ever present, with both sides on high alert and ready to act at a moment's notice. That would draw in Russia and China, who see Iran as a strategic partner and would resist U.S.-led regime change. These global powers have their own interests in the region, and any threat to Iran could be seen as a threat to their influence. Their involvement would dramatically raise the stakes, making diplomatic solutions harder to achieve and increasing the risk of a wider war. They could supply Iran with weapons or even deploy forces, risking a standoff between nuclear powers. The world has not seen such a dangerous confrontation since the Cold War, and the presence of nuclear arsenals on all sides means any misstep could have catastrophic consequences for humanity. Meanwhile, Iran could close the Strait of Hormuz, spiking oil prices and triggering global economic crisis. The world's energy supply would be threatened, sending shockwaves through financial markets and everyday life. Millions could lose jobs, and economies could collapse under the pressure of skyrocketing costs and uncertainty. The conflict could quickly expand, forcing other nations to intervene. Alliances would be tested, and countries around the world would be forced to choose sides or risk being caught in the crossfire. The United Nations and other international bodies would scramble to prevent disaster, but their influence might not be enough to stop the momentum toward war. What began as a regional war could become a global fight for economic survival. The ripple effects would touch every corner of the planet, from the world's largest cities to its most remote villages. No one would be immune to the consequences of a conflict on this scale. The world stands on the edge of catastrophe. The fear of World War III is not just a distant nightmare. It's a real and present danger that demands our attention, our caution, and our commitment to peace. As the world reels from the initial exchange, the future is uncertain. Diplomacy offers a narrow path to de-escalation, but trust is scarce and pride runs high. The US and Europe push for negotiations, hoping to avert disaster. Yet Iran's nuclear ambitions remain unresolved, and Israel's strikes may only harden Tehran's resolve. The risk of renewed violence is ever present. The events of June 2025 have changed the Middle East forever. The era of shadow war is over. Direct confrontation has begun. Whether this leads to unstable deterrence or open war will define our time. The world stands on the precipice, hoping for peace, fearing the abyss.